He's Dave, and I'm Dallas. We have opinions on just about everything. Sometimes they're on point, and sometimes they go down better with a glass of wine. Join us. This is the Wine and Podcast.
Welcome back, everyone, to another Wine and, the show where we pair wine with movies, TV, music, books, comics, and maybe one day we're going to pair it with, I don't know, astrology. Astrological signs. So today's conversation is going to be very astronomy themed, but that's a little too weird even for one of these random openings. So instead, I say, let's maybe one day consider pairing wine with astrology. Are you pairing with a Leo, an Aries, a Gemini, a Scorpio? I'm a Cancer, and you better be pairing that shit with a Petite Syrah if you want my ass to be sticking around. Dallas, what about you? What's your sign?
I refuse to answer this question because it's nonsense, but Scorpio.
Okay, you're a Scorpio. What should people be pairing with a Scorpio? Okay, what do I know about you? You're mercurial. You don't answer texts half the time. Let's see. What do I pair with a motherfucking Scorpio? Something astringent, something difficult, something that's a challenge.
Probably.
But can
Yeah,
but can at certain times of day, like as it's aging in the bottle, it can be friendly, but it's only like at certain times. And then after that, it's a challenge all over again. So
it's like 5 minutes at a stretch.
5 minutes at a stretch, something like that. And, Curtis, we haven't introduced you yet, but fuck it. What's your sign?
I am a Cancer as well.
You're a Cancer as well. All right. So you're a Cancer. So I say Petite Syrah, but that's me. What do you drink on your birthday?
Syrah. I do drink Syrah.
Syrah.
Yeah.
Very close. Very close.
Yeah. I'm a red wine guy, so it's either Syrah or a Cab for me.
Beautiful. All right. Well, before I actually let you guys know who Curtis is, because he is our guest today, first, if you like what you hear today, please make sure to hit that follow or subscribe button. It does help the podcast grow and reach new listeners. And if you love us, then please leave a 5-star review. You can leave that on Apple iTunes, Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. I know Spotify allows 5-star reviews now, not 4, not 3. Yeah, I mean, it allows those reviews, but just give us a 5-star review. And if you don't love us, your name might be Neil Armstrong, that poker-faced, emotionless bastard. What am I talking about? Oh, we're going to get there. We're going to get there. But first, let me also mention that you can find us on Substack, our home base online, where you can also find uncut, lengthier versions of these episodes, along with articles on the intersection between entertainment and wine. I am working on an orange wine article right now. I'm very proud of it. It's going to be probably posted later this week as we're recording this, so by the time you're listening to this, it will be up on our Substack. There will also be interactive polls, bonus pairings, and more. That is wineand.substack.com. And you can also shoot us an email at wine, the letter N as in Nancy, pod as in podcast, winenpod@gmail.com. So, folks, today, as you've already heard, we have a special guest, Curtis Frisle. That is Curtis with 2 S's, because he is just that badass. And Frisle, correct me if I'm wrong, Curtis, with 2 S's, but I believe that's pronounced like Fievel, like an American Tail, Frisle goes west. Is that correct, or am I off base on your last name?
You are on base. Well done. Most people don't get that correct. Yeah, you nailed it right out the gate.
Nice. So, anyways, Curtis, let me tell you a little bit about Curtis. Nothing is known about Curtis's life prior to his career, which began in 2007 with an appearance on the hit Nickelodeon show Drake and Josh. He also started writing in 2005 before stopping in 2012. His acting career, however, has continued since. Curtis has appeared on Criminal Minds, Robot Ninja and Gay Guy, the horror movie Don't Blink, 911 Lone Star, Danger Force, and he also, frankly, the most important credit, co-starred in a short film that I produced many years back, Extra School, opposite Bruce Davison and Robert Picardo. Curtis with 2 S's, welcome to Wine and how you doing this fine morning?
How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me. What an introduction. Wow, that was better than anything I could have ever done. And yeah, Extra School. That's so funny. Dude, that was such a fun shoot. And
it was such a fun shoot.
I think it's on Amazon Prime, right? You can find it?
Amazon Prime. Yeah.
Go find it. You can see me poke Robert Picardo in the butt with a safety pin.
with a safety pin.
There you go.
And Robert Picardo is having the time of his life on this shoot. Let me tell you, it's funny. Bruce Davison and Robert Picardo, they both did this. It's comedy, folks. It's like slapstick comedy virtually. And they did it because they're like, we never get to do comedy. And so we got them on this short, and they are having a ball.
Oh,
let me tell you.
Yeah, they were loving it, and they have such great chemistry together. I mean, it was just that was a really fun time. You know, we only shot it, for 2 or 3 days, something like that, and
3 days, 2.5 days, kind of a thing.
Not enough. It was so fun every day. Yeah,
it was.
That was a blast.
It was, and it's funny, a little behind the scenes. The director really didn't think and want it to be quite that broad of a comedy. But then all the actors, I think I don't know if I ever told you this, Curtis, but Carey, the director, when he wrote it, he's like, I mean, it's comedy, but he didn't think he had written a broad comedy script. And it's funny because that was news to me as the producer on the script. Because I read the script and I'm like, oh, this is great. This is wild. This is like in your face comedy. Like this is blah. And it's like, but it's funny. It's actually going to work. And every single actor who read the script took it that way. Everyone was doing broad comedy. And after the shoot, we went to a diner at the end of the final day. And, we were fucking exhausted because like all shoots, it's one of those things where it's go, go, go. And it's like just 10, 12-hour days for you. And then it's over. And then you're just like... And so we were at the diner and it was like, post everything. And we're like, we did it. We fucking did it. How do you feel? And he was like, yeah, I think everyone had a really good time. And then he revealed that he's like, I was a little confused that everyone thought this was this broad of a comedy. And I was just staring at him like, I thought it was this. I'm like, wait, this script you didn't think was a broad comedy? I'm like, I don't. And I was still, so we've had, and me and the director have had many conversations since where I've just been like, yeah, Carey, man, no, it was a broad comedy. I hate to break it to you. But he fought it a little bit on day one, where he was trying to rein you guys in, and then he realized no one was interested in being reined in.
That was
and he was getting
in the theater, right? Like it was just
in the theater, yeah. In the space,
Bruce.
And
Bruce,
Bruce,
he is a hurricane force of acting. There was no reining him in. He was going to do what he did, and he was so brilliant. He was great.
He was. And again, he and Robert were both like, we get to do comedy. Mm-hmm. So they went whole hog on the comedy because we rarely get to do this. So they weren't doing satire. They weren't doing, they weren't doing anything subtle, nothing nuanced. Everything was going to be like Three Stooges style of humor. And they were all in. And about halfway through that first day, which was kind of our half day, he was only like an hour or two in, and Carey, the director, was just sort of like, I guess this is what we're making, and just sort of ran with it. And of course, all the rest of us were oblivious. We're like, this is going great.
Yeah. The short is kind of about it gets a little, like, it becomes a competition at one point. And that's kind of what it felt like on set. Especially when you're doing comedy, you can fall into this, like, everyone's trying to one up each other, and for this particular thing, I think it helped because it just, everybody just kept raising their game, because it did that first day. It started out a little bit, everybody's kind of feeling each other out. What's the energy we're feeling? And then Bruce, the second Bruce starts going, okay, well, we're going to follow him. He's taking the lead.
Follow the hurricane.
Right. Well, and I think that's the thing is like you guys, there was Bruce and Robert, and then the three students of Bruce. This is called Extra School, which is the whole theme of the short. Is it's a school that teaches extras how to be extras, which is the comedy. No, there is no school to teach extras how to be extras. There is no real. You show up. That is being an extra, right? But it's like there's an art form. You can be the best extra you can be on set, and so he was teaching them how to be extras. So Curtis was one of the three students. And if there were roles that would have had a little bit of subtlety or a little bit of nuance, it could have played it kind of sort of straight and the comedy still would have translated. It was you three. But then Bruce was giving that energy and you guys just wound up, I think by like take two, like you said, you saw what he was giving and you were like, oh shit. And then like brought your all A games or like really high energy A games. And then it was high energy from there and forward. All right, guys. So, but we are not here to talk about Extra School today. I would be tickled pink if we were here to talk about Extra School, but we are not. That would be a little self-serving, and I would be way too biased to talk about that, honestly. But what we are here to talk about, Curtis has picked for us the 2017 feature film First Man, starring Ryan Gosling and Claire Foy, based on the novel First Man, The Life of Neil A. Armstrong by James A. Hansine. So a little background of First Man. First Man is not the first, but the fourth feature by director Damien Chazelle, following Guy and Madeline on a park bench in 2009, which was his senior thesis project at Harvard, but did go on to debut at Tribeca Film Festival and was later distributed by Variance Films. He then also worked as a writer in Hollywood for a number of years, his credits including The Last Exorcism 2. He also worked as a writer in Hollywood for a number of years, his credits including The Last Exorcism 2, Grand Piano, starring Elijah Wood, which I heartily recommend. It is pulpy. It is not objectively a good movie per se, but it is, if you love giallos, go look up a very modern, non-Italian giallo, Grand Piano, starring Elijah Wood. It's fun. It's usually on streaming somewhere, so go find wherever it's playing right now. Take a look at that. That was written by Chazelle. And he did a rewrite of 10 Cloverfield Lane, a project that J.J. Abrams did also want Chazelle to direct, though Damien instead chose to direct his second feature, which turned out to be Whiplash, a movie based on Chazelle's own experiences trying to hack it as a jazz drummer in high school. Note, Chazelle does still have a writing credit on 10 Cloverfield Lane, even though he bowed out of directing it. Now, although no one was initially interested in producing his Whiplash film, his script for Whiplash was featured on the Blacklist in 2012 as one of the best unmade films of that year. The project was eventually picked up by Right of Way Films and Blumhouse Productions, who suggested that Chazelle turn a portion of his script into a short film as proof of concept. This was really interesting to me because I did not know Blumhouse. Why did they need a short film as proof of concept when they were already on board? Turns out that Blumhouse did this was the first short film that they have a producer credit on. And there are two more they did, one in 2014 and one in 2015. The one in 2015 was by director Scott Derickson, the director of the first Doctor Strange movie for Marvel. He had already done the first Doctor Strange movie for Marvel, but they still wanted him to do this short proof of concept. And to my knowledge, those next two short films that Blumhouse produced did not ever turn into a feature of any kind, which is really curious to me. I wonder why they chose that path for these particular projects. Like, something about them, they're like, let's see if these shorts do anything. Or, I don't know, maybe these were just directors they were close to. They wanted to do shorts. They said, sure. And it wasn't about making a feature. But in this case, it absolutely was. But
the one that Scott Derickson did, you said that one never got turned into a feature at all.
Nope.
That's interesting.
You can find it. I think it's called Shadowplay or Shadowlands or something like that. If you look up Blumhouse on Wikipedia and look at their credits, those short films, the 3 short films are listed. The one Scott Derickson did is on YouTube, free to watch for anybody. So you can find it pretty easily with a Google search and just go there, take a look at it. But yeah, no feature film was made from it.
Was it intended to? There's no information out there.
There's no information.
Wow.
So
that's bizarre.
There's no info saying that it was. Even on YouTube where it's listed, there's no description where it's like, this was a proof of concept for nothing. It's like, here's the movie. It says directed by Scott Derickson, and that is the end of the information listed on that short. So it's like, okay, this short exists. Great. And then the third short that they did in between the Chazelle and the Scott Derickson short is some director I've never heard of. And, Googling his name does not bring up much either. So it's curious. They tried this 3 times exactly, and they've never done it again since. And that was 2015 was the last one. So they did this sparingly and only during this handful of years. But this was the success story, which was Damien Chazelle's Whiplash. So Chazelle did an 18-minute short for Whiplash, and it was accepted into the 2013 Sundance Film Festival, where it was well received. Financing was then raised for the feature film, and in 2014, the feature film was released to a positive critical reaction, Whiplash received numerous awards on the festival circuit and earned 5 Oscar nominations, including Best Adapted Screenplay for Chazelle, and it won 3 of those awards, including Best Sound Mixing, something to remember when we start talking about First Man. Thanks to the success of Whiplash, Chazelle was able to attract financiers for his musical romance drama La La Land, which turned out to be his 3rd feature film. Now, fun fact, La La Land was in fact the script that Chazelle wanted to be his first big project after his senior thesis film. And the years when he was writing freelance, he was focused on trying to get La La Land off the ground. And Whiplash was something he fell back on because that got traction long before La La Land ever did, which makes a lot of sense because La La Land, that full-blown musical starring Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone, I think the budget was the budget needs were much higher.
That's a heavy lift.
Yeah. Coming off of his student thesis film, which sounds like something that's going to be like a Talking Head style of indie film project. And then he's like, La La Land. And everyone was like, yo, you're cute, son. Pat. Right, exactly. Here's a pat on the head. Keep writing, son. Keep writing. And yeah. And so maybe 10 Cloverfield Lane if he had done that. But it's interesting because he got offered to direct 10 Cloverfield Lane. And there was something about that where he was like, I need to do Whiplash instead. Now, it makes a certain amount of sense because Whiplash was all about his experiences of trying to hack it as a jazz drummer himself, right, in real life in high school. And so, which he was never as successful as the main character in Whiplash. Like, he did not get to that ending where he made it through. In the end, he was like, no, I did not have the innate talent to do this. I could not hack it as this. But it was music based and kind of in that world. So I think maybe that made more sense. And then, of course, it was a passion project. It was his own creation.
And he wanted to be the auteur. He didn't want his introduction to Hollywood to be this established IP. He wanted to come in and I'm the guy. I'm the IP. Damien Chazelle.
Exactly.
You want to control the narrative. Exactly.
So after La La Land, which then La La Land was an even bigger success in many ways than Whiplash, it won the big Academy Awards that year, and then Chazelle's almost. That's true.
Almost.
It won Best Picture for 30 seconds.
That's right. And anyone who doesn't know that story, Google that because that is one of the funniest stories outside of Al Pacino's delivery. Was it last year that Al Pacino had that delivery? Where he's just sort of like,
it's the best picture I see. You know?
Right, he's like, I see blank, and the dead silence in the room because they're like, was that the actual announcement?
He didn't say the words. You gotta say the words.
Right.
And then he just walked off stage, and people were like, "Oh shit, clap!" And then bring up the people.
Like,
and it's
someone get Grandpa. Someone get Grandpa, please.
Right.
Yeah.
And that created an entire conversation now where they're like, maybe we shouldn't bring up any more 80-something-year-olds to present and do these things.
That's right. The two who announced La La Land were both in their 70s or 80s as well.
Yes. So as much Hollywood royalty as they are, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, now that we're all living to be 110, maybe we have to let go of Hollywood royalty at a certain point. We need that cutoff, kind of like what we're discussing with Biden and the presidency now too, right? Where it's like, you know what? We're all living way too fucking long now. We live, but are we functional? And there's a difference. And we might need to start considering this now that we're actually getting past our functional years and still sticking around. Anywho, Chazelle's next project.
Nice soapbox there, Dave.
Exactly.
We're going to cut that out.
Chazelle's next project was First Man, his 4th film. Now, Warner Brothers originally held the rights to the book about Neil Armstrong by James A. Hansen. They snatched up the rights in 2003 before the book's publication, which is a very common thing that Hollywood does, especially back in the day. And they snatched it up for Clint Eastwood to direct. This was right after Eastwood had done Space Cowboys in 2000. But apparently, Eastwood, quote unquote, didn't quite click with Armstrong. Armstrong, of course, was still alive during those years that Clint Eastwood was trying to get it off the ground. And Armstrong was not agreeing with any of what Eastwood wanted to do with that project. Armstrong, of course, passed in 2012. And that does seem to have given the story new life in Hollywood. Go figure. So now his first wife, Janet Armstrong, played by Claire Foy in the movie, was still alive and was around during the development and production of this version of the movie. She passed only 2 months before the film was released.
Oh.
Now,
wow.
Chazelle was given the book by Universal and DreamWorks, who then had the rights. Chazelle read the book and watched a number of documentaries on the subject to see if there was any sort of story that he wanted to tell. And in Damien's own words, I quote, "I don't know what clicked, but at some point I was just like, wow, how have I taken it for granted that in order to have the success story we grow up with of people walking on the moon, people had to turn fantasy into reality and completely put their lives on the line in order to do that. How do you get from 1961 to 1969, from barely getting into orbit to walking on the moon? It's 32 times the size of the Earth, the distance from the Earth to the moon. That's an insane magnitude. You look at it on a plot and it's mythological. Suddenly, it was like Orpheus going into Hades. You're going where humans are not supposed to go, and everything about the natural world is telling you that this is not where humanity is supposed to go, and they did it." So, after hammering out a 72-page treatment, Chazelle confesses he wanted to leave the heavy lifting to another writer. He and the producers then brought in Josh Singer, who was coming off of Bill Condon's The Fifth Estate and Tom McCarthy's Spotlight, which was only then launching into production. Chazelle went off to shoot La La Land, and Singer got to work at cracking the story. The movie filmed in Atlanta, Georgia in 2017 on 3 different film formats: Super 16 millimeter, 35 millimeter Technoscope, and Super 35 3-perf. That is one format altogether, and IMAX 70 millimeter. The movie was filmed without the use of green screens. Instead, LED displays of up to 10 meters or 32.8 feet were used to show all of outer space and all of the moon landing and what the astronauts are seeing on the moon. So the actors were literally standing in front of these LED screens and seeing what the audience sees at all times. So they wanted something that could be, they wanted something that could be immersive for the actors, not just green screens, which only the audience get to see that spectacular view. They were like, when you're shooting these scenes, you are seeing everything that the audiences will see as well. So that's the end of the preamble. That's the end of the history of this movie. It did release, it has a good rating on Rotten Tomatoes. It's got an 82% or 85%, something like that, approval rating from critics. I believe the audience score is not far behind that. And it was a box office, it was neither a it wasn't a runaway hit, nor was it a bomb. It was
stable.
It was stable.
A very stable.
Exactly.
Release.
It didn't lose money per se. It made twice its budget, which is almost exactly what you need. It made $109 million on like a 50-something million budget. So, it like broke even essentially. And then of course it has the long legs of everything that it does after that. So it was a solid movie, but compared to Whiplash and La La Land, which were just absolutely smash successes for what those movies were, this was probably seen to be a little bit of a disappointment at the box office, a disappointment for Chazelle in terms of just, it's not another mega hit, which, hey, you can't have every movie be a mega hit unless you're fucking James Cameron. So you have to have a few, and even James Cameron had The Abyss, let's face it, people. So
his best film. His best
film. Absolutely.
Yes. And oh man, getting to the making of behind the scenes of The Abyss, it's insane.
Oh, it's fantastic.
The best documentary making of. It is crazy.
I would say the only documentary making of I would give over that one actually is that Hearts of Darkness. I think that one.
Okay, that's a good one. All right, I'll give you that.
But those two are two of the best of all time because there's so much that happened on those sets and the insanity of making those movies. And when you find out what these directors wanted to do and then did, it's mind-boggling.
Yeah,
and it's mind-boggling that the movies are even as good as they are.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, on First Man, you're talking about they got these LED screens so they can see what this amazing thing. It helps the acting. The Abyss, James Cameron's like, you're going to swim underwater and hold your breath. And you might drown.
Right.
You might. I don't know. We'll find out.
James Cameron almost drowned
But
twice.
you still get the shot.
It's insane. Yeah.
Right. Well, it brought up that whole thing because one of the things that has been spoken of in Hollywood with these auteur directors and what directors always ask of actors, sometimes, especially when you're that crazy auteur, is, the sort of get out of jail free card is like, I'll never ask you to do anything I wouldn't do. Right. And so, and that's true. Like James Cameron is willing to die for his craft, but there still is that question of like, is it okay to ask other people to die for your craft? Like you're willing to die for yours. Are you really, would you just be on someone else's set and be willing to risk the same? I'm like, come on, James, come on. Let's talk. Let's straight talk here.
That's the beauty of being an auteur. You don't have to apologize for asking people to go to their limits. You just don't.
You don't. But you should. I think there was whose birthday was it yesterday? It was on Facebook. Some actress. The actress in Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Bastards.
Diane Kruger.
Thank you.
Kruger.
And they were talking about how like Quentin Tarantino actually almost choked her out for a choking scene.
Yeah, because that's his hands, he's like, right, in the film.
Yeah, that's his hand.
That's right.
Yeah, and actually cut her air off, and she pretty much did pass out from the choking, and she agreed to it.
Yeah,
but it's still that one of those things where you're like, did you really need?
Well, not just that. Uma Thurman has this great story she tells about how she was roughed up and he kept saying, do it again, do it again. Hundreds of takes for these really physical sort of things. Right. So, once you get to that point, I guess you just keep going until someone says no, Quentin.
Well, on the point of Kill Bill and Uma Thurman, I mean, that was tough because he was trying to do that Hong Kong style of action. And they do that. Or like the reason they capture that kind of action is they fuck up all their actors.
Because they're doing it.
Yes. It's like they do not care and they will break you in two and risk their own. And again, if you're a Jackie Chan or a Sammo Hung, you're doing it too. It's that whole, I won't ask you to do anything I wouldn't do. But you were broken as a 4-year-old and your whole life, like it's a little, and you're just anyone who comes across your path, you're then like, you do it too. And it's like, wait, I'm sorry, what? So,
and I think sometimes these directors just get tunnel vision. It's that scene in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade where Allison Duty's reaching for the Grail at the very end, like in the crack, or not. Sorry, not Allison. Indy's reaching for it, and his dad's like, Indiana, and he snaps him out of it. Oh wait, you're right. What am I doing? Yeah. What am I doing? Pull me out of here.
Right. And for me personally, like if you're going to be an auteur, as much as I understand how much we celebrate these movies that got captured on film because of how nutter butters these auteurs were, especially back in the 70s, that auteur era, there's a part of me that's like, if the only way you were able to capture it on film was by actually doing it, what skill does that take? Like what talent does that take?
Method.
Right.
That's
right.
Method.
It's like you literally
method extreme.
Right. It's like you're just like, well, let's just do it and I'll point the camera. And it's like, good job. I don't know. I'm come on, man. Come on. Anyway, let's get back to this auteur, Damien Chazelle and First Man. So Curtis, this is the point in the podcast where we like to ask everyone, what is your history with this movie? So you picked this for us to discuss today. So why did you pick it for us to discuss today? When did you first see it? And what were your thoughts when you first saw it?
Loaded question, Dave. I picked this one. First of all, you did an amazing job with the preamble, kind of setting up Damien Chazelle, because he's one of my favorite filmmakers today. I love everything he does. Although I will say I haven't seen Babylon yet, so that's on me. That's on me.
Me either.
But Whiplash is one of my favorite films of all time. Like I would be bold enough to say it might be in my top 5. La La Land, I'm a little lukewarm on. I still appreciate what he did. And I still love him as a director. And then First Man, I had so much hype for First Man coming out, and
interesting.
Yeah, and it was funny because, like you said, Whiplash was kind of this indie darling hit, wins an Oscar. La La Land was just like this mega smash hit. He had so much momentum at this point, and then it kind of just came and went, and it's kind of lost to time now, and
a little bit.
And it's funny because I'd only seen it once before rewatching it again for this podcast. And you know how sometimes you watch a film and you don't maybe remember the specifics so much as how you felt after you watched it? My feeling was I was blown away by that film. I remember that ooey gooey feeling you get inside where you're like, oh man, that delivered. That was a good cinematic experience. That's what I had inside. I really didn't remember a lot of the specifics, including that it was this kind of exploration of grief. I kind of forgot about that whole plot line.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, as a new father, boy, did that hit a lot differently than when I originally saw that. I was like, oh my goodness, this is a lot heavier than I remember.
Yes.
But I watched you guys do the podcast on Speed Racer. And I loved that you chose this movie that felt to me like, yes, nobody talks about this enough. And so it got me thinking, what other films do I like that I feel like nobody talks about? And one of the first ones that popped in my head was First Man. And so then I suggested it to you, and here we are today.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. Not many people talk about this film. When you brought it up, I was like, oh, right. First Man, it exists. Yeah. Right. It's a film that it came and went. It was a blip. I think it's one of those films that just, it was unfortunate where in his career it dropped, because coming off of such an ascendant climb, that was so, his trajectory was just whoosh straight the fuck up the stratosphere, pun intended. But then this, right, where it's like, which leaves the atmosphere, leaves the stratosphere, and yet it just disappears. It's like still lost out there in space somewhere, and you're just like, oh yeah, he made that, right. I forgot. That said,
I do remember. Oh, go ahead, Dave.
No, you go ahead.
I remember when I first heard about this film, I was excited. I wasn't a huge Gosling fan, but I love Chazelle. But I remember thinking, this is going to be a difficult sell because it's such American mythos, and those films are difficult to kind of launch in sort of in a specific point in time, but they do stand the test of time. This film will age so well. This film will be a classic in 20 or 30 years for sure, because of the filmmaking, because of the character, because of the Americana.
If people can remember it,
will age well.
If people can remember
because of I think they will, because of its place in sort of the American mythos. The sort of space race, particularly Apollo 11, you go through sort of phases when everyone's really romanticizing it. And then, you get a decade or two where no one cares about it. So I think the pendulum kind of will swing back, every few decades. And when it does, this film will be at the top of the list because it is so well made. Gosling shines. I honestly, this is a hot take, and it might be a bit controversial, but I am not really a fan of seeing Gosling on screen. But this has made me a convert. This film has made me a convert. I was so satisfied with his choices. I'm sold.
So Dallas, when was this first time that you had seen the movie?
This is the first time I watched it all the way through.
So I similar to Speed Racer, I think I left the theater.
Yeah, basically. But no, what I did was I did remember when I first watched. I think I got a screener for it, but I remember watching the opening sequence, which is masterful. Opening sequence is just masterful. I can't even say enough about this opening sequence. Guys, if you only want to watch a portion of this film, go watch the opening sequence. It will tell you everything you need to know about the narrative, about the character, and about the filmmaking, because it just shines. And Dave, you mentioned the filming technique of these LED panel for the actors, so you can get that kind of photorealistic response. I would love to see this on in IMAX, because I'm sure it is a truly immersive experience.
My greatest disappointment is that I didn't get to see this even on a big screen. I think I saw it on a screener as well at home.
Yeah.
I'd love to see
and
it.
Parts of it are 70 millimeters, so it would have been like parts of it you're not seeing.
Right.
This was the first time I'd seen it as well, and or I hadn't even tried to see it before now, so it was a movie that was just forgotten. I think now I have not seen La La Land either. I love Whiplash. I saw that long ago. I have not rewatched it, but I did think it was absolutely amazing. Like, chef's kiss, just an incredible experience. That the performances, the way I'm a big percussion drummer fan when it comes to music. I think it's a very underrated part of most music, where drumming can make a style of music, a piece of music, a band. If you have a drummer that knows how to both be virtuosic and blend in and just be what the music needs, but they can walk both those lines. Sometimes, like, I'm a big Phil Collins fan, for the reason that if you listen to a lot of old school Genesis songs, and when they're in their prog years, and you listen to his drumming, half the time I'm listening to everything around the drumming and I'm like, this is only okay. But with that drumming, fucking A, it's just like, I could listen to it forever. And it's a piece of music that sometimes, even with pop music, like sometimes I'm listening to a Taylor Swift song, or, as Dallas knows, a Carly Rae Jepsen song, or something of that nature. And then whoever was behind the percussion, like the beat they chose for that, I'm like, this is a fine song that is taken up to another level because of that percussion. So when a movie about percussion and just how insane and difficult it is, and what a virtuosic drummer it actually looks like and sounds like, I was all for it. And, one of the things we're going to discuss is sort of Damien's obsession and sort of natural reliance on sound because of his background in drumming and percussive sound, which is something I want to actually spotlight in this movie a little bit. We'll do that in just a moment. But this movie for me was one that I loved. Whiplash. I was one of those that La La Land was such a sensation and there was so much hype around it. I'm like, I will watch it one day, but I'm not watching it right now because I can't with the hype. It's like I have to let it die down a little bit, but then forgot about it, which is I could watch it any day now, and I definitely do. I'm curious about it, but just never got around to it. And First Man is one of those that I think just because the word of mouth when it came out was so muted.
Yeah.
Where the critical acclaim was actually fairly solid, but there was something weirdly muted about the whole thing. And it's interesting because the movie itself is kind of a muted approach to this subject matter, where it could be very histrionic, it could be very rah-rah America, even rah-rah mankind, like, look at this amazing thing. And in a way it is. In a way, you could see that quote I did earlier where Chazelle was talking about the story and saying, like, this was mythological, like what we wound up achieving. Absolutely. But at the same time, the reason it's mythological is because it was just people in a rickety spacecraft that was screwed shut, and it's like, and that made it to the fucking moon. And it's just sort of like, when you watch it, there's an element of this movie where he likes to keep that grounded reality in everything, where he's like, there's very little sensational in this movie.
And actually, Dave, to illustrate that point, the scene where Ed and the two other guys are testing the system, Apollo 11 first test flight, or is it Apollo 10? Apollo 11, and it implodes essentially from the fire. Right. That scene where they're just holding on the hull door, and
and then the smoke, like a poof, like a tiny little poof. Yes.
Yeah.
And
you honestly could see how rickety this ship was.
Right.
How sort of
right.
It's funny because we all know the outcome. They made it to the moon.
Mm-hmm.
They made it back.
Mm-hmm.
They're these American heroes, and Chazelle does such a good job at keeping the tension like just completely at a 10 every time they're in even the tests or in space or whatever. Just the shaking, the rumbling, and he played. This is one of the things I love the most about the movie. He plays it almost exclusively from the point of view of Neil Armstrong. So you're watching, you're seeing what he's looking at, what he's seeing, the little tiny things out the window. You're seeing the
you're marveling with him.
You're marveling with him. Absolutely. That's one of the things that makes that first scene so great. When he's first going up into space and he's bouncing off the atmosphere and stuff, you're seeing it from his point of view. You're feeling what he's feeling. It just gives me goosebumps talking about it.
It does.
Yeah.
And, this might be a good place for me to talk about that whole percussive thing. So I'm going to play 2 audio clips, each about a minute long, one from Whiplash and then one from this movie. And I want to just listen to them side by side because this is something that this was the first time I'd ever seen this movie, and it's the Gemini 8 launch. So the first launch that Neil Armstrong is in, the one that they almost didn't make it back because of how many things went wrong. This was like their Apollo 13 moment where it was like the mission was kind of scrubbed and then they barely made it back alive because of how many things did not go to plan. But first, I'm going to play a minute clip from the finale of Whiplash of our main lead protagonist, played by Miles Teller, drumming for his life. Here we go. And now I'm going to play a clip of that Gemini 8. This is just when they're entering it and then launching.
Yeah. Is running, got a roll program in. Rock and roll, good liftoff. Fuel cells are solid.
So I don't know about you guys, but when I watched this scene, it really struck me, and I went and found a Whiplash clip just to try to compare the two like this, but how much, and it's much more dialed into the background in the First Man scene because the drumming is not the point. But even when they're entering the spaceship, there's this cymbal thing going on, like shh, shh. Mm-hmm. And then the moment it launches, it's all these different vibrations and percussive sounds that gives you all the intensity that's going on from sound-wise. And so this is a movie that did also First Man. It was nominated for Best Sound Design and Best Sound Mixing, which, and I think Whiplash was Best Sound Mixing, but not Sound Design for that movie. But he's very good at using sound design to do heavy lifting in his movies. And it really struck me how much these scenes, especially when the spaceships are doing what they do, that how much percussion is a part of that, and it gives you that tension and like that, and sometimes it's slower, sometimes it's really fast. I don't know. It struck me very. Did either of you? Do you feel the same? Do you feel like I'm reaching? You can feel free to tell me.
Oh no, that's definitely noticeable. I mean, I think one of my notes is in watching this is he does an amazing job with filling sort of the sparseness of this narrative, because it is a very sparse narrative, because it is sort of it's an Americana, it's a mythos, right? It's a character that you don't need a whole lot of information about in order for the character to be potent.
True.
Because it lives in some sort of romantic space in our minds and our hearts. So what he does with sound is really just, like you were saying, Curtis, with getting into the spaceships, the creaky sounds, the sort of rolling sounds, the metal, the sort of just empty barrenness of these sort of rickety old spaces. And, that's ends up being another character in a lot of these scenes. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, it makes sense that sound design is in the forefront.
In some ways, it's almost necessary, too, because so much of this film, especially Neil Armstrong, everything's so introspective. All of his drama is it's all inside, and so much of it is played through just looks. The whole final scene, they don't even say anything. It's just they're speaking through their eyes, and you gotta.
Which is why I think I fell in love with Ryan Gosling. He wasn't speaking, and I was like, oh, he's a great actor. He's not speaking.
But he's got to fill this with something, and we're just fortunate enough that Damien Chazelle has this amazing background in music and really sound, and he knows how to fill that silence, and he knows when to use the silence too, like when they land on the moon and they first go out, and it's just.
Oh, that's great. That's a great
love
moment.
Love it.
He does the same thing when they actually the launch that's going to the moon, because they never leave Earth's orbit in any of the other tests.
Right.
And when they're leaving Earth's orbit, finally, it's like loud sound. It's like if this thing is straining, it's creaking, it sounds like it's going to tear apart. And the moment they break free from the orbit, like they're free from Earth's gravity, it's like dead silent, void silence.
That's a great
and
moment.
You're
There's
like,
always
whoa.
great moments.
And everything's floating around, the gravity goes, they're spinning stuff.
And then they literally have to turn on music in the ship so that there's like sound of some kind, because it's just dead silent. From
and what do they turn on?
A good clip.
Jazz, which is
jazz.
Damien Chazelle has this like running theme of jazz throughout all his films.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously
he tried to be a jazz drummer himself. It makes sense. That's why he did Whiplash.
That's true.
Yeah. And I can't remember the name of the jazz piece, but it was something on the nose for a space flight too. It was something cosmic, universe, like something. Oh, they mentioned it because the person who even like they started playing it,
lunar something.
Yeah, they're like lunar something, and they were like, really?
Yeah.
So speaking of that, let's actually, I mentioned earlier in my opening that emotionless bastard Neil Armstrong, that poker-faced emotionless bastard. So let's talk a little bit about Neil Armstrong here, because this was based on a book, and we know Neil Armstrong was not happy with any scripts about his life that were coming before he passed. And his wife, Janet Armstrong, which was his first wife, they did eventually divorce, but not during the time of this movie, and not for quite a while after this movie, but you can see why. Because she corroborates this this version of Neil that we're getting in this movie, which she was like, if he said no, that was a long conversation with Neil. You know, like that was a, like the fact that he said anything at all was a conversation.
Right.
He was a man of incredibly few words. There's one scene in this movie where Gosling gets kind of upset and he goes into the backyard alone, and one of his neighbor friends, who's also, you know, in NASA and one of the astronauts, like comes over to see how he's doing.
The character Ed. Yeah.
Character Ed. And he comes over to see how he's doing. And Gosling, the only thing he says to him is he's like, "Do you think I'm in this backyard because I want to talk, Ed?"
Okay. We have to talk about this moment.
Okay.
Because I have never felt closer to a character in my life.
Yes. Well, Mr. fucking Scorpio, go for it.
I've never felt closer to a character in my life. It's like I walk as far away as possible. I'm staring up at the stars on the far end of the property. Do you think I came out here to have a conversation? Like, go away. Anyway, so
yeah.
Favorite scene.
And so, well, and even Ed was like, "Well, okay, I know you're saying that, but you really want to." And Neil was like, he said just the same line again, even more emphatically. Yeah. He's just like, "This is not a cry for help. This is not a no. Right. I really do want to talk. Please, someone follow me." It's like, I'm back here because I don't, and fuck off. Right. And like, he doesn't say fuck off, but man, he basically said fuck off. Like,
I did think I'm going to remember that line.
And that's.
Because that's such a good line, you know. And it made me think, like, why have I never used that? I've been in those situations before. So, you think I came out here?
I've definitely said something similar.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So this was Neil to a T, and we've talked a little bit about Ryan Gosling as Armstrong, but then Claire Foy as Janet Armstrong is one of the true strengths of this piece as well, because she is, if anyone,
she's the anchor. She's the anchor.
Sort of. She's not just the anchor, though. If anyone actually has dimensions.
No, the anchor.
Oh, anchor. Okay, cool.
Anchor.
She is the anchor.
She's the heart.
Because she's the one character that is given dimensions in this movie.
Right.
And all the astronauts, really, when you get down to it, they're all sort of one note. And I think on purpose, I think very consciously, they're like, you're the this, you're the that, you're the this. And just be that.
Yeah, they're company men. Yeah.
They're company men.
Yeah.
They do have personalities that are different from each other a little bit, so they bounce off each other, they rub against each other, so on and so forth. But it really is almost like these are the astronauts are the personalities. Like, you know, they're those guys you meet like you meet them. They're neighbors. They're coworkers. They're someone you kind of sort of know.
They're archetypes.
Really,
actually.
Right? They're archetypes. Yeah. You know the surface level, what they present to the outside world, but that's kind of all you know about them. You get to know that they're family men for the most part, so it's tragic whenever anything happens to any of them. But they are all it is an interesting choice of this movie to make them these archetypes, to make them these one-note characters, and then it's the women at home that they really kind of give any sort of depth or interdimensionality to.
Yeah,
that's kind of a masterful stroke as well, because you realize these characters, which again they live in our mythology now, Buzz and Lance and these guys, Lance Armstrong, no, the other Armstrong,
Neil, there you go.
Neil, thank you.
The non-doping Armstrong. Not that we know that for sure.
But you know, because they live in our sort of collective mythos and lore, they do kind of become one note, because they had very singular missions, and the real heavy lifting of the emotional weight of carrying that on their shoulders was, you know, it was their parents, their kids, their wives, their communities. I think what's crazy is the dynamic between Neil and his sons it's just painful to watch. It's uncomfortable to watch. It really is.
Well, and
I mean, it's go ahead, Curtis.
I was just going to say the men in this film, you know, their heads in the stars, pun intended. You know, and the women,
literally and figuratively,
are grounded because they're back on. And you know, it's one of those things. This film is so rich in many themes, and they don't explain any of it. He's so good at leaving it up to you to what, you know. There's a moment. We'll get there on the moon that I want to talk about with Neil, but we'll get there.
Okay, I mean, we can get there pretty much right now. I'll just add to this that I do think the women are and the families, as Curtis said, they're grounded. And I think they're really supposed to be like our POV, the audience's POV. Like, we're the people that would not go to the fucking moon, unless it was like a commercial flight that was so ridiculously safe and proven, like, otherwise we ain't going to the fucking moon. That's crazy. And when you see what they were going in and what that experience was probably like and how much it failed until it just didn't. And, it's crazy because we were in a race against the Russians, right? And so much of the testing leading up to it didn't really work. No. Like, even when it worked, even when it worked, it only kind of worked. And there were still so many malfunctions that they got back by the skin of their teeth. And then they're like, well, anyway, we're running out of time. Let's do it. And
this is the stuff that happened on Earth. It's like, dude, we haven't even been in space. Right. Who knows what the hell's going to happen?
There's a whole list. Right. I will say this. One thing in terms of the relationship between the mothers, the wives, and the children and the father is that dynamic seems to be saying, kids, daddy is no longer ours. Daddy is no longer ours. Daddy no longer belongs to us. Daddy belongs to history. That's really the kind of, I think, the takeaway, the texture of that dynamic. Because at the end of the day, it's true. I mean, it's sort of like someone working for the government. Your job comes first. And with this, space being the goal, it's even sort of more electric, I suppose. But
Well, and they play it so much with Neil. It's, how do I say this? The movie begins, the film begins with the death of his daughter, who had cancer or something?
They don't really, I can't remember if they ever said in the movie. I'm not sure if they said.
The point is, she's taken from him, and it's almost like the whole time he's looking for an escape. How do I get away from this pain? How do I get away from this grief? And he always, there's so many moments he's looking up and he sees the moon. He's like, if I could just get there, all this pain will go away.
If I can just get there, I can forget what just happened here.
What happened down here.
That's
exactly.
The thing.
And so it's so funny because, we were saying a lot of his struggle is internal. He doesn't say his want. He doesn't ever. It's there, but it's not like he's like, I must get to the moon. He just keeps driving forward. Mm-hmm. And
he's showing up to work the day after the funeral.
Exactly.
Right. He's he's
just as obsessive as everyone else, but he just shields it.
Well, and I think that's part of the reason I think they chose to make all the men one-dimensional is. Part of it, I think, is what kind of person has the blinders on at that point to go to the moon, to do all of this, and to just keep charging forward, even failure after death, after a near death, after another death, and you're still just like, I'm going to the moon. And it's
crazy
like, dude, what the fuck? Like, take a hint. Like, why no one is responding? They're just like, we're going to the moon. No one's looking back. And so I think those characters are like, you have to be so one thing in your way and we're going to get to the very end because now he gets to the moon and he comes back. But before we get there, Curtis, we're on the moon. What would you like to say about now that we're on the moon?
There's this moment. It might be my favorite moment in the whole film. So this whole time he's been looking up. I want to get there. I want to get there. I want to get there. He gets to the moon, and all the stuff on the moon, by the way, is just absolutely gorgeous. The way it's shot. Yes. Now that I know the LED screen thing, it just blows my mind. But there's this moment where he kind of like looks over. He sees Buzz is like hopping and how about the moon doing
having
his thing.
Fun,
and then he looks out, and you don't even see his face because he's got the like shield, the like solar shield thing down.
It's all reflective.
It's all reflective.
You're just seeing a reflection, right?
Point of view, and he's looking out, and it's just nothing. It's almost like I got here. This is it.
Right.
This is.
I'm going to nothing.
Yeah, and he's looking out. And it's just this black abyss and this gray, boring landscape.
Featureless landscape outside of some bumps and some craters, and he mostly spends it looking, because then he goes to a crater and looks down.
Yeah.
And
down at the dust.
It's the only time in the movie that we pretty much ever see him. Like, sometimes he's just avoiding eye contact, and so he's looking down in the movie. But it's the only time he's actually looking at something, when he looks down. And he looks down, and then of course he brought, and this was made up for the movie as far as we know.
Perfect.
But he brought a piece of jewelry that his daughter used to wear, and he dumps it into this crater in the moon, as sort of like, that's his American flag planted in the moon kind of a thing. Like, I was here and this is my, and it's part of it. I think obviously thematically, it's like, I'm letting it go. I'm leaving it here. Right. And I'm leaving, now that I've made it to the moon, I'm leaving it here.
Yeah. And it's a perfect, it completes the arc. But there is also a moment where he's on the moon and then he llooks back to Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Almost mirroring how he would look up at the moon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was trying to figure out what they're saying by that. What that means. Is he like, maybe the grass isn't so green on the other side of the fence, sort of thing. Like, wait, do I want to go back there?
100%. Well, in Earth from a distance,
it's crazy you say that. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, in Earth from a distance, like the moon from a distance, always looks kind of fascinating and kind of like, ooh, wouldn't it be amazing if we went there? Think about how amazing Earth looks from a distance, and just like, if you weren't there, that is your destination.
It's
like that is
changes.
Right. It's so much more beautiful, and there's so much more obvious life and things there than this literally dead, desiccated rock of nothingness that is just floating in space and tethered to us. Yeah, go ahead, Dallas.
See, I think they pose the question a number of times in the film, is it worth it? One of the wives asked the question early on, is asked that question. They were asked that question at the press conference. And I think sort of the part of the answer to the thesis, or the connection to the thesis, is that moment of him looking back at Earth is an answer to that question. It is clearly worth it. Going to nothingness is worth it. The death, worth it. The torment, the trials, the failure, all worth it for that singular moment, because that moment places him in the archives and annals of history. But not just him. It places humanity in the archives of... And I think Chazelle, with this film, like you said earlier, Dave, it isn't necessarily just about Armstrong. It isn't just about the American persona. It is sort of an existential kind of human endeavor and achievement. And I think with that moment, Chazelle kind of cements that.
Right.
Yeah.
And to coda it, they come back to Earth, and the astronauts all have to be quarantined for a couple of weeks because they don't know. They're like, they could come back with disease. We don't know how space works, right? We've literally never been.
Which is fantastic, right? But we got there. We don't know what the fuck to do when they get back.
It's like, if you went to a foreign, because it's the same thing. Like, if on Earth, if you went to a foreign country, and like you could come back with an exotic fungus, disease, spores. Who fucking knows?
What does the moon have?
What does the moon have? Right. And we're pretty sure it's lifeless, but we don't know. So because them coming back, they brought their first moon rock samples and so on and so forth. Like, this was the beginning of us exploring that. So just to be safe, they quarantine them for a couple of weeks, and they're like, they all seem healthy and whatnot. But then while they're quarantined, the family can come and see them through this thick sheet of glass. A part of me at first, I was like, I don't know how true this is to how they quarantined these astronauts back in the day. But they didn't even have like the phone system that like fucking prisons have, where it's like you can talk to each other through the glass or anything. No, she comes in, and basically he's on this thick double pane sheet of glass, so they can't even really talk to each other. They can just look at each other. But I get the feeling that might have been something that is not 100% true of what the quarantine was back in the day.
Well, there is some archival footage of that, actually. Really? And part of it is kind of just a big glass. I think they move them, to different layers of security over the course of the
no. It's not just that. I just mean, like, there's no way for them to talk.
Oh, the communication. Gotcha.
The idea that he's on, you're on a quarantine side of glass, and it's like, and you didn't put a speaker system in that someone could talk to you on that corner. I'm like, I get the feeling that is probably not true.
Dave, what do you want?
No, not quarantining people. That's not true.
I
Not in terms
notice.
of humanity quarantining people. We should know how to
They don't
install
even know if
that.
they brought back a cold or not, you know?
Yeah, but we know how to install a speaker system when we quarantine people. We have done that before, just not from space.
Oh, come
So,
on.
no.
Give the
I
guy some
don't buy
credit.
it, but regardless, it does give us as forced as it may or may not be, it does give us a beautiful coda to all the themes of the movie and where it brings these characters, because Armstrong gets to not talk, which is his want. And Janet's on the other side, and they sit down and they just do this thing where like they sit down and like he won't make eye contact, but then he does. And like, you know, he comes towards the glass first. He makes eye contact first. Like it does this really great subtle job where you can see he's trying.
I'm telling you.
Right. And
this is Gosling's best work.
It's very good. It's very good.
Sorry.
It is very good.
Sorry.
It is very good. In Dallas, I disagree, but I understand.
He is
almost as wordless in Drive, and I think he's very good in that as well.
He's also in a very, very good episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Are you afraid? Interesting.
Just putting that
throwing that out there. Throwing that out there. And I do think that there is something to range in the terms that Gosling can do something like Barbie and do something like this and be equally as fitting and like, just suit that world as well as he does. So I'm okay with broad. I'm okay with over the top. Like, I think that's a skill in and of its own right. It's good if you should also be able to do quiet and wordless like this movie. But I don't find one a greater skill of acting than the other.
No, I don't find them a greater skill. I just think he's displaying his best skill in this.
Yeah, disagree with that, but okay. It is a very good performance.
So real quick, did you finish with the coda, Dave?
The only thing I was going to add is that the final bit is them touching their hands to the glass. And even when they touch their hands to the glass, how stupidly tentative it is.
That's true. Strained
like,
it was.
They do it in this like curled finger way and then slowly unfurl one finger to touch, like E.T. Phone Home, one finger touch to each other. And it's just like, dude, like, wow, it's so, but it is the reconciliation and it is meant to be. And it is a real, because he's like, I do want to come back. Yeah, I do want this to work again, and so
there will always be
a great point.
This thing between us.
Yeah, there will always be this thing, right? Yeah. So real quick, just want to jump back. I think my favorite line. I always try to find one line in good film is when they were at the press conference. And Buzz. First of all, let's talk about the Buzz Aldrin character. There's some great lore and mythos about Buzz Aldrin, how he kind of was just kind of flippant and off the cuff and would say the wrong thing at the wrong time all the time. So
this
that's
movie
always
takes
beautiful.
That to an nth degree. Holy shit!
That's his whole.
He says,
it's great. It's great.
Well, to the point where you're kind of like
crazy,
right? As big of an asshole as Neil was, you're like, dude, Buzz.
Yeah.
You're like, stop, man.
Oh, what's amazing
never
is he
talk
was
again.
Clueless.
Oh, geez.
He was so clueless, and there are these great stories about people wanting to just fight him because he would say the thing. He'd had no filter. Anyway, the press conference, and they ask, what are you going to take, Neil, to the moon? And the response, God, what's his name? I just said it. Buzz's response was, I would love to take some jewelry from my wife. Right. Yeah. And Neil was, of course, like, if I had the choice, I'd take more fuel.
Exactly.
I was like, oh, I love this. This is me. This is who I am. I love this.
Except, you know what? It is who you are too, Dallas, because he said that because he couldn't bring himself to say what he was actually probably thinking at that time, which he brought a piece of jewelry of his daughter. You know, that's what planted that seed. He was in that moment already thinking of bringing the piece of jewelry of his daughter, but
he already had it.
He was damned if he was saying that to the press and to the public. That.
Okay, now let's talk about this real quick. All right, this is another hot take I had. I thought. Right, I'm sorry.
It's okay. No, weird thing.
So we were talking about the answer to the question: is it all worth it? And when he dropped the daughter's bracelet, there was something in me that thought, maybe his sort of singular vision was simply, or at least in sort of the narrative here, to get that that piece of his daughter to the moon. To get that piece of his daughter to the moon. Maybe that was the fuel, that was the fire, that was the catalyst. So again, it's a possibility. I don't think it is what Chazelle was going for, but it does complete the arc for me. It does answer some of the questions about the motivation for Armstrong's sort of singular vision, rather than just being the kind of archetype who is so, intensely focused on the mission. So yeah, that was just something I thought when I saw that moment. It's like, okay, all right, there's something else here possibly. So yeah, you're going to say, Curtis, what are you going to say?
I'm glad you guys watched it. I'm glad we had fun.
I'm glad to. It's one of those that if there's one thing that I'm not sure of, I think that I would be polar opposite than Dallas on in terms of opinion here. It's like, I don't know how much this movie is going to be remembered over time. It'll exist and people can discover it. People can find it. I think people who do discover it and find it will enjoy it. I think I don't know if they'll fall in love. It's one of those movies that isn't made to fall in love with, per se. It has an effect and you appreciate it like tremendously, especially if you're ever in a phase of your movie watching or entertainment consuming life where you want a movie that isn't just too much. It's not the Hollywood schmaltz. It's not the saccharine-ness. It's not the, here's the orchestral music to tell you exactly how to feel at every single moment. Here's the script that's going to hit the beats that you're going to cry at the end, and you're going to hate yourself for crying at the end because we are pulling your strings so specifically and artfully. But if you're like at that point where you're like, I want something subtle, I want something that's going to I can just watch and get what I want out of it, or get what I do get out of it, but it's not spoon feeding it to me, and it's not forcing me to acknowledge what it's doing every step of the way. Like, this is that movie. This is that movie you need to seek out, or one of the kinds of movies that you can seek out to get a break from that, because it's not that, which I think is a big part of why it's been somewhat unjustly forgotten.
It challenges you. And often those types of films don't have the longevity that a film like Apollo 13 would have.
Right. Right, because it's not challenging in that
I don't think it's
Werner Herzog,
David
Lynch,
absolutely
right?
Not.
Yeah,
it's much more subtle. But and the thing I like about it is it's not that hoorah American, Apollo 13. Like they don't have the big, when they get back to Earth, it's not even. It's just like, and we're back. They leave the moon and now we're into quarantine. They do like a little montage with JFK giving his speech and stuff, which is great, but it's not that a crowd of people, none of that. It's not that kind of movie. It's a very anti-biopic,
Yeah.
To your point there too, Curtis, I do recall now there being, because this came out around the time of Venom. I think it came out the same week as Venom.
Yeah, maybe.
And
possibly.
And some big Goosebumps film, but I remember there being some brouhaha about the lack of the American flag being shown.
That was a controversy at the time.
I don't think. Right. And there's some theories that sort of hurt domestic box office, which, to be fair, knowing the general public, okay, I could see, but not in any significant way. But there is the American flag is suspiciously absent from the film, which I think is.
Well, and I think it was smart. I mean,
it doesn't need
whatever you think about the American connection to the film. I think it's smart because it's less about what America did, more so than what mankind did. This is what we as humans were able to do.
I agree with that. And the official statement
without
that
the
Chazelle
competition of the Russians, we wouldn't have gotten there. Sorry, Dave. Go ahead.
I was going to say the official statement by Chazelle about why there was no depiction of the American flag is he only wanted to focus on stuff we didn't have archival footage of already. So he's like, I wanted to show moments of this experience that is not like you can't just look it up on YouTube anytime you want.
Yeah.
I didn't want to recreate what we already had. I wanted to show you the POVs and everything that we don't have, to watch at any given time. So that's why that American flag moment, according to him, and who knows if maybe that was the thought he had, maybe that was the philosophy behind the whole movie, and then the American flag, maybe it was something where they're like, you don't have the American flag, and he's like, oh shit, I didn't even think about that.
That's a very safe answer.
right. So he gave a safe answer, but I do probably agree, having now seen this movie, that like that probably was his actual approach to the movie / philosophy behind it, because that is what we get.
Yeah.
All right, so we are at the point now where we do the beverage pairings for everything. And what would we drink while watching this film? Curtis, did I prepare you for this or did I not? Did I tell you needed to bring a beverage?
I am prepared because I'm familiar with the show.
To it. Okay, good.
Yeah.
I sometimes when we Facebook message and I set these things up, it's the worst way to do it, because then I'm just like chitty chat, and I'm not doing it formally. So then I forget to send the formal shit over, which is that yes, we're going to do a beverage pairing. So Curtis, you're our special guest. Start us off. What did you pair? What do you drink with First Man?
Well, I will say, first of all, I am not the wine aficionados that you guys are. That being said, I thought long and hard about what I would pair with this film, and it's a very heavy film. So I think I would go the counter programming route, and I'm going to go something lighter, And in the spirit of the film, there's the great scene where it kind of connects it to the civil rights movement with the Whitey on the Moon. And I'm going to go with a white wine. I'm going to go with...
That was a great moment, by the way. We didn't mention that. I like that song. That was great.
That's a very famous... there are covers of it and treatments on it. It's very sort of important in sort of the civil rights kind of canon, but it was just so random. I was like, oh, they got a black guy. Nice.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Although, to be fair, that is a common theme. Like, on the one hand, it's a little bit of what we're still going through today, that constant... mindset of like, why don't we fix everything at home? Like, fix something in our city before you fix the nation. Fix something in the nation before you fix another country. Before you help someone out or send them money. Why can't we fix everything right here? And to be fair, there is something to like, can we give people equal rights before we send someone to the moon?
Absolutely.
Right. But you know what? It's like, no, because going to the moon is easier. Weirdly, it's fucking easier.
Right.
I know. So in the spirit of Whitey on the Moon, I would choose a white wine, something a little sweeter. I don't have a specific thing for you, but I'm gonna pick a Riesling. I think a Riesling would pair nice with First Man.
All right.
I mean, do with that what you will. I don't have a year or a make or model
or a specific brand or anything, but a nice white Riesling. I will say that one thing about a Riesling that works in my head for something like this is, again, emotionally, this is a very closed, cold movie. And I do see Riesling as a emotionless style of white wine. It's not... it's dynamic in its way. It is an intellectual's white wine. There's a lot to appreciate and this is a movie where there's a lot to read out of it. There's a lot to see between the lines. There's a lot to digest and to think about. But it's not an emotional movie. And I've always found Riesling, I have no idea if Dallas is going to agree with me on this, but like, Gewürztraminer would be that style of white wine that has more emotion to it, that has more both warmth and coldness to it, that has like different layers of that. Whereas Riesling is a cold wine. It is
it's a cold wine.
Yeah.
Well, this is exactly.
So
you're just saying all the things I clearly was thinking.
So go ahead, Dallas.
All right, so as we know with these pairings, it's either the wine I would drink as a character in the world or the wine I have while passively enjoying it on my couch or wherever I'm enjoying it. And this one, I decided, what would I like to drink for that first step on the moon if I were there with Buzz and Neil? And I would want something that has some earthy minerality to it, because I think being on the surface of the moon, you're sort of just faced with just the mineral nature of existence of the solar system, because it is just a large rock that's been pounded into submission. And, it's covered in this fine dust, and you've got the stars, and you've got the cosmos above you. You're looking at the vantage of Earth from a different perspective. But I would also want something in that bottle, in that glass, that is celebratory. And for me, when I think of celebratory flavors and profiles, it's almost always, my default is cherry. I still haven't figured out what that is yet. But there's something about the cherry that is both sort of acidic and sweet and citrusy, but also jammy, and it just sort of it's celebratory to me.
Now, do you distinguish between like red and black cherry? Is it more like the tart red cherry style that has all those layers, or does black cherry still do it for you?
Black cherry, yeah, I mean, I would say honestly the combination of the two. Whenever I make a cherry pie, it's the combination. I like to fully express the kind of vernacular of the cherry, because they all hit the tongue in different places, and you put them all in one sort of compote or pie, and they sing in a way that the individuals don't.
I really should have recruited Dallas for a cooking and baking show. But instead we're doing a wine show.
And also that kind of something that had a little oak to it, maybe a little vanilla, because I like to think of those as kind of human flavors. I don't know how to describe this, but it's like when I want a flavor that kind of strokes my humanity. It's like a good whiskey, oak aged,
things we have to make.
Vanilla.
I mean, they might be natural processes, but like we have to induce, like vanilla, you have to extract it. Those woodsy flavors, you can't actually eat wood, so you've got to. Actually. The hand of man and our ingenuity has to get those flavors somehow.
That's right. And that kind of mirrors, just the space race in general. So those three things in general. And you start looking around at which treatments, which varietals kind of give you that. And for me, it's gonna be a Shiraz. And I remember having this, I think, Dave, I'm pretty sure you and I shared a bottle of this, a couple of glasses of this, but it's a Bella Ridge. This is years ago.
Okay.
But Bella Ridge, which is an Aussie winery, they do a just phenomenal Shiraz. And you pick up that tart raspberry, that cherry, you get that oak, and they're all kind of, I don't want to say they're equal in presentation or expression, but over the course of a glass, each one kind of just slaps you in the face and becomes the star of the show. And in terms of what I would want to drink standing there with Buzz, I'm sure he'd be saying something inappropriate, and Neil would be silently crying off to the side, and I'd be there just wondering how the hell I got here. With a bottle in my hand, it would be this Shiraz, because all those different kind of profiles and experiences are expressed on the bottle. So I chose the Bella Ridge Estate Western Australian Shiraz. This is a 2012, so it's already got 12 years on.
Yeah.
And I think the one you and I had, Dave, was a 2010. I think it was a 2010.
How long ago is this? This is not ringing bells.
This was when we first started doing the show. I came over and I had a bottle of this.
Huh.
We drank this, and it may have been one of our Barolo episodes around that time.
Okay.
So that was a 2010. Anyway, it is it's kind of fantastic, and go pick it up. You can probably find it for around for the 2012. $30. I think they have a 2015 for about $20 as well. So
very nice.
That's my pairing, and I'm sticking to it.
All right, beautiful, nice and affordable.
I'm not the long-winded one today.
Okay. You're not.
Great.
Sorry, I would be remiss if I didn't mention. I told my mother-in-law that I was going to do this show, I was like, oh yeah, and we like pair a wine with it. And she said, well, what about moonshine? I mean, it's first man moonshine.
We've done that.
And I was like, well, it's wine but I was like, that's very funny, and I will make sure I give you credit on the show for that. So
that's a good one. That would have been good.
Has been suggested.
Yes. Well,
that would have been a perfect thing to have on the movie. But yeah, go for it.
Well, and to be fair, on that topic, so moonshine would have probably fit these days in America too far better than wine of any kind.
Oh yeah,
would, because my thought process, I thought initially like what kind of wine would match the era of the film, right? Though for the most part, those kinds of wines, like American wine from the 40s to the 60s, they really don't exist these days. And honestly, thankfully, they don't exist anymore these days.
Actually, the cherry wines were really popular then. Now that I think about it, cherry wines are really popular in the 60s.
I was talking about wine, not things we sometimes slap the name wine on, but with another fruit. But moonshine, your backyard moonshine, which by the way is what was it recently? Like it's legal again now for the first time. Was it only a state that had it illegal for like 134 years or something like that? Like you couldn't do your own hooch of moonshine. And
I think it's New York.
Is it New York?
I think it's New York
something just this past month finally did away with like 100+ year law in the books that like you weren't allowed to make your own moonshine. And they finally did away with that. It's hilarious. America has a weird history with alcohol because of prohibition and things like that. Like we got weird, but then again, we probably did abuse the shit out of it. So it's like, the laws came about for like they were addressing something, and then we promptly forgot about them, and no one wanted to ever be the lawmaker to remove a protective law. You know what I mean? So it's like, who's the one to do that if anything goes wrong? So you get cold feet, and it just hangs out for a fucking century. Anyway, those wines don't really exist. Gosling in the movie, his character Neil Armstrong, he always seems to be drinking these dark liqueurs in the like a whiskey or a scotch in a glass. Always seems to be what he's sipping on. But I was like, no, this is not a whiskey or a scotch movie. It's not that heavy. It's just there is still a lightness to it. There's something that I wanted more brightness to it than a scotch or a whiskey, and a little less alcohol. Like that didn't quite seem to be a match. I thought about what Janet Armstrong might drink while drowning her sorrows in dealing with her emotionally absent husband and very demanding kids. And I'm like, probably a Pinot Grigio or shitty box rosé of whatever back in the day. But again, it's like, I'm like, no, but that's not really a pairing with this. So in the end, First Man is all about men dreaming a fantasy and having it become a reality. So I wanted to choose a wine that was equally as daring, made by dreamers and mavericks that wanted to do the same in the wine scene. This will be no surprise to Dallas, I don't think, enter a winemaker named Randall Graham. He's considered to be one of the original quote-unquote Rhone Rangers of California, who believed in and introduced Rhone grape varieties to California, including Grenache, Syrah, or Shiraz, as Dallas paired with. It was the same thing as Syrah, Mourvedre, Cinsault, Carignan, those types of grapes, and really took California wine to the next level in terms of international recognition and like what we could do here. At the time, we were already the Cabernet Chardonnay capital of the world because of winning this thing called the Judgment of Paris competition in the 70s. But this was the 80s into the 90s and the 00. Randall Graham, he founded this cult winery called Bonnie Doon during those decades, which was a mail order only winery. And this was a huge hit. Like every wine he ever made was experimental, doing things that had never been done on American soil before, made in ways that were similar, that were inspired by the European and the French styles of winemaking, but always doing something a little different from them too. He never wanted to be slavish or slavish, however you pronounce that word, to their version of winemaking either. He was, by modern standards, he's just celebrated. He's just like, this is what everyone should be doing. We should always be trying new things. What's the point if we're not? But at the time, he was just considered fucking insane. And everything he wanted to do was like, you can't do that. And he's like, why? why not? Let's try it. If it sucks, it sucks, and we don't release it, whatever. But let's try it, and it'll probably be interesting at the very least, which tends to be true. So Bonnie Doon, he actually sold. It's a winery he sold a couple years back. He no longer owns it, but he's founded a few new wineries since, and one of them is called The Language of Yes. It was founded. The very first vintage was in 2020. And language of yes, or la langue de oc, is the term that medieval folk of southern France and adjacent areas used to describe who they were and how they spoke, differentiating themselves from the la langue d'oe, which both terms just mean the language of yes, literally, from those two. But they were, of course, different dialects, and they warred with each other. So they called themselves slightly different, but they were both supposedly the language of yes. So the language of yes wines, they're all about preserving the old ways, while doing something daring and new, always pushing it forward, always doing something that hasn't been done. The old ways are, of course, we've already mentioned the hand of man in a lot of things. In wine, that's a term that is used all the time. You have like what nature gives you, and then you have what the intervention of man, like what we do to the wine, what we choose to do. You want to have as light a touch of the hand of man as possible, while also, doing something that, like, making decisions as men to do something that, like, nature won't do this all on its own, or we can pick and choose exactly what parts of nature we're using, what natural processes we're going to allow to happen. So I have a bottle here, one of the very first releases of Language of Yes from 2020. This is Dallas, their Syrah. So we basically both chose the same thing. Shiraz is just what Australians call Syrah. So this is their 2020 Syrah en Passelarage, which is the French term. A lot of wine people are more familiar with the Italian term appassamento. So it's the exact same meaning. They are partially dehydrated grapes. So you partially raisin the grapes to concentrate the sugars. In this case, according to Randall Graham, he says, quote, "We adopted the extremely non-standard practice air drying the grapes post-harvest. The extremely mild climate of the Santa Maria Valley," which is where this is from, so Central Coast, allowed us to dry the grapes al fresco, in situ, gently placing the grapes on paper trays in the shade of a vine canopy. The intent was not so much to dehydrate the grapes. This does happen to the tune of pecking up. When you concentrate the sugars, you get a little more alcohol because you have to convert all the sugar into alcohol. So maybe 1% of additional alcohol. But rather, the main idea was to lignify the stems. And lignify basically means to woodify the stems. So you take the stems from being more quote unquote green and bendy and water filled and pliable, and you desiccate them to where they are more woodsy and twiggy. And then you whole cluster, ferment these bad boys. And yes, the grapes are a little partially dehydrated, but the stems are in there as well. And so you get all these crazy woodsy flavors and elements on top of it. And this is a wine that has, much like Australian Shiraz, it's very similar. You get all these, like, you have this crazy acidity in there that gives you those red connotations, but then also lots of dark purple fruit and juiciness, black pepper notes. You get a lot of things. This was a wine that reminded me a lot of, you get these roasted meat and like rosemary and floral tones. This felt like kind of a Sunday dinner of the era that this was taking place in. This would be a wine that would go with it. It has flavors of that type of meal. So that was sort of as close as I could get there. But then you have also that buoyancy of the acidity and the sharpness of Syrah with the heaviness and the dark fruit flavors. So you get that nice balance, like Dallas was saying with his Shiraz, of you're hitting those notes. Because this movie, you get the darkness of space, you have the death of certain astronauts. Like, this is heavy themes, and yet it is emotionally kind of distant on purpose. And it stays light to the touch. You get what you get at what you choose to get out of it, but you got to get in there and dig deep and find those themes and find those meanings. And I found this wine to be very similar, where it's just, there's so much going on in the bottle. It's like a meal unto itself. But you got to sit with it and you got to dig into it, because there is so much going on. And again, made by a maverick winemaker. So I wanted to match what was going on at this time and with these types of mavericks during this point in history.
Yeah.
So that's my pairing. Language of Yes
All right.
2020 and Passelarage Syrah. It's actually still available on their website. They still have bottles left. So you can find that on the Language of Yes website, which I will have a link down below. All right. That's
Sweet.
the end
Yeah,
of the
good
pairings.
Good choice.
Thank you so much for listening, everybody. So, Curtis,
Thanks.
we always end with our guests. If you have any place you want people to follow you online, or if you have anything coming up that you want to shout out or pimp, please, now's the time to do so.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, I mean, like we mentioned earlier.
He's like, I'm a new dad. I haven't got
new
nothing
dad.
happening.
Exactly, man. That's it's the greatest and hardest role I've ever played in my
Yes.
life. And I'm loving
There you
every
go.
minute of it.
Beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to follow me online, I guess I got Instagram. You can follow at Curtis Frisle with two S's.
Two S's. Two S's. Curtis with two S's.
Two SI.
Frisle. Again, I'll have that down below. If Instagram is his choice of social media, I will make sure to put that down below as well so you can follow him. Thanks so much for being with us, Curtis. This has been great. It was wonderful talking about First Man. And to all you listeners out there, thank you so much for listening once again. We will be back in 1 week with another wine and entertainment pairing for your entertainment. Ciao for now, everybody. Catch you then.
Bye, guys.